Okay, so you're back with us for another deep dive, and we're going deep today.
Oh, yeah.
We're diving into Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston.
One of my favorites.
It's a book that, you know, I feel like a lot of people maybe had to read in high school or in college or something. And it's one of those books that, you read it then and maybe you get the surface.
Right.
But there's so much more there.
There is so much more there.
And so we're going to really unpack it today and explore some of the deeper themes and ideas.
Absolutely. And what's so cool about this deep dive is we have excerpts from the novel itself,
Okay.
but also we're going to be looking at the foreword by Mary Helen Washington.
Awesome.
And I think that adds a really interesting dimension because she read this book.
Yeah.
She first encountered the story during the Black Studies movement.
Okay, wow.
And so, she's coming at it from, this kind of historical perspective.
Yeah.
But then also her critical understanding has evolved over time.
Right.
So we're going to get into, some of those questions that she brings up as well.
Very cool. Okay, so our mission today is to go beyond just like a simple plot summary.
Right.
And really understand, the core of Janie Crawford's journey.
Right.
Like, what is she going through?
Right.
The world that Hurston created, like what is the society that she's living in?
Right.
And then, even think about like the questions that the book raises that are still relevant today, like almost a century later.
Exactly.
So it's going to be, I think, a really interesting discussion.
I'm excited.
Me too. So let's dive right in.
Do it.
So we start right away in chapter 1 with Janie's return to Eatonville.
Okay.
And, it's the end of the day and people are coming back home and the community's gathering and like...
Right. It's like that time of day.
It's like everybody's kind of like observing.
Right.
And they immediately notice Janie coming back.
Yeah.
And they're immediately judging her appearance.
Yeah.
Her figure, her hair, her clothes. It's like they're doing this assessment.
Yeah. It's interesting because, Mary Helen Washington talks about how, this novel really gives us this window into Janie's consciousness, right?
Yeah.
So we're seeing kind of her internal world, but then we're also seeing the very limited perspectives of those around her.
Yeah.
And I think their reaction to her, their kind of judgmental scrutiny,
right,
it kind of suggests their own, limited experiences.
Yeah.
And maybe even a little bit of a desire to see her brought down.
Okay.
Because she seems to have lived this different life.
Like she's above them.
Right. And, they even hold on to her old clothes.
What?
Yeah, like they keep them and they're like...
They save them?
They save her old clothes, yeah. And it's almost like a symbol...
Oh, wow.
...of this past that they're hoping she'll be forced back into.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so there's this kind of underlying hope for her downfall.
Yeah, I think so.
And we see people like Sam Watson and others gathering on her porch, like gossiping, and they're convinced that, some divine judgment
God's
is going to expose all her secrets.
Yeah.
But Janie doesn't really play into that.
No, she doesn't. She kind of throws them off guard immediately.
Yeah.
By saying that, she has money.
Yeah.
She has $900 in the bank.
She's independent.
She's financially independent.
Yeah.
And she also mentions tea cake.
Right. She mentions her love for tea cake.
Right, and I think that immediately contradicts what they were expecting.
Right, they were expecting like a woman alone.
Right, a woman alone in mourning.
Yeah.
And then she comes and she's got money. She's got love.
Yeah, she's got her own thing going on.
Right, and then her friend Phoebe, comes up and she's eager for information.
Of course.
They're close friends. And
they're good friends.
And Janie says that really poignant line. She's like, ain't got nothing to make me happy no more where I was at.
Right.
So she's not returning because she wants to.
Right.
She's returning because of loss.
Yeah. And she even says to Phoebe, like, remember, we've been friends for 20 years.
Right.
We're kissing friends. Give me your good thought.
Right. She's appealing to their shared past
Yeah.
and kind of setting the stage for her to confide in her.
Right. Okay, so what does this opening scene tell us about, like, the big picture of the novel?
I think it really sets up this tension between individual freedom and community expectations.
Right.
Janie has had these experiences that have taken her outside of what society expects from women.
Okay.
And her return kind of makes everybody face that,
right.
And their judgment really shows how strong those social norms are and how suspicious people are of anyone who's different.
Right. And so Janie's journey is going to be navigating that.
Yeah, that's what she's going to have to deal with.
Okay, so we move on to chapter 2.
Okay.
And we kind of get this, look into Janie's early life. And she has this, beautiful metaphor of her life as like a tree, that's been through, good times and bad times. And she says,
Right.
things suffered, things enjoyed, things done and undone.
Yeah. I love that imagery.
Yeah.
It's so powerful.
So she's had this, full life already. And we find out that, she was raised by her grandmother, Nanny.
Right.
She doesn't really remember her father or mother.
Yeah, she has no knowledge of her parents, really.
And she was raised in the house of a white family.
Right. Washburns.
Yeah. So it's a very unique upbringing.
Yeah, and it leads to that really powerful moment where she sees herself in a photograph.
Oh, yeah.
And she realizes, I'm colored.
She's like, wait a minute.
Right. It's like this simple discovery.
Yeah.
But it really defines her, in a society that's so focused on race.
Right.
And then right after that, we get this beautiful imagery of the pear tree.
The pear tree, okay.
Which kind of symbolizes, her burgeoning sexuality and this ideal of love that she has.
Right. So the pear tree is about her kind of like romantic awakening.
It is. And she talks about this love embrace of the blossoms.
Yeah.
And it leads to this remorseless, sweet pain.
Right. So it's this ideal of like mutual desire and like...
Right. It's like a perfect blossoming of love, which, as we go through the novel, we see that that's not always her experience.
Right.
But that's her initial idea of what love should be.
Okay. And then, but Nanny doesn't share that perspective.
No, Nanny does not.
She sees Janie kissing a boy at the gatepost and she's
horrified. She compares it to a manure pile.
She's like, absolutely not.
Right. And, you have to remember that Nanny's perspective comes from her own history.
Okay.
She's experienced slavery. She's seen the worst of what society can do.
Right.
And she's terrified for Janie's safety.
So she wants to protect her.
She wants to protect her.
Okay.
And, she even says that the black woman is the mule du world.
Right.
Meaning that they're always carrying the burden.
For everyone.
Right. For everyone else.
Okay, and Nanny's explanation of her own past is just really, really hard to hear.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Her own mother's experience with rape, during slavery.
Right.
And then Janie's mother being born as a result of that. It's just...
It's this cycle of trauma.
Yeah, it's this cycle of like vulnerability and hardship.
Yeah, and it really shows, how much Nanny wants to protect Janie from that.
Right.
And that's what leads to her... pushing Janie towards Logan Killick's.
Right. She sees him as like this safe option.
Exactly. He's got land.
Yeah.
He's got a house.
He's got the organ in the parlor.
He's got the organ in the parlor. He's got 60 acres.
Yeah.
And to Nanny, that equals security.
Right. So she has a very practical view of love.
Very practical. She says that love is just pulling and hauling and sweating.
Yeah. It's about survival.
Right. It's not about romance.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that you have what you need to survive.
Right. So it's this arranged marriage that's supposed to provide stability.
Right.
But Janie is not into it.
She's not into it at all.
She doesn't see Logan as the, sun up and pollen and blooming trees.
He's not the pear tree.
Right. Exactly.
It's not giving her that feeling.
So there's this conflict between what Nanny wants and what Janie wants.
Yeah.
And then along comes Jody Starks.
Okay, Jody Starks.
And he promises... the far horizon and change and chance.
Right. He's all about ambition and progress.
Right.
And, when they arrive in Eatonville, it's described as this raw place in the woods.
Yeah.
It's very small.
Yeah.
It's very humble.
Yeah, it's like the beginning of something.
Right. And Jody wants to make it something.
Right away.
Right away. He wants to be a big ruler of things.
And he wants to be called mayor.
Exactly.
Even though there's not even really a formal town structure yet.
Right. He's establishing himself as the leader.
Yeah. He gets the store going. He gets the post office.
Right.
And, the townspeople have different reactions.
Yeah. Some people are a little skeptical.
Like Coker.
Right? Coker kind of dismisses him. He's talking like a section foreman.
Yeah.
And then you have Hicks, who is envious, but also kind of admires him.
Right. He's like, wow, look at this guy.
Right.
So the store becomes this central hub.
It does. It becomes the meeting place for the town.
Yeah. It's where everybody hangs out and, shares stories. And
right. It's where life unfolds.
And there's this episode with Matt Bonner's mule.
Yes, the mule.
That I think is so symbolic.
It is so symbolic.
Everybody's kind of teasing Matt Bonner about this mistreated mule.
Right.
And then they end up buying the mule and freeing it.
And Janie's there. And
yeah. And she's like, oh, praise the Lord for getting that mule free.
Right.
And then the mule dies.
The mule dies.
And they have a mock funeral for the mule.
It's like this whole microcosm of their lives. And I think the mule really symbolizes the oppressed. The people who are always being stepped on.
And Janie's empathy for the mule really contrasts with Jody, who is kind of like...
He's more detached.
he doesn't really connect with it emotionally.
Yeah.
He's more performative.
Yeah. He's like, oh, yeah, this is what we do.
Right.
Okay, so we also have this, debate about caution or nature.
Right, on the porch of the store.
Yeah, on the porch of the store. And it's like this classic,
like male intellectual sparring.
Yeah. They're like showing off their knowledge.
Oh.
And then there's Daisy Blunt.
Daisy Blunt.
Who arrives, and all the men are like...
Yeah, they're flirting with her.
They're like making a big show of
Yeah.
flirting with her. So it's like you get this sense of the social scene in Eatonville.
Right, but underneath all of that,
Yeah.
Jody's possessiveness over Janie is growing.
Yeah, he's like really controlling.
Yeah, he doesn't want her to participate in the conversations on the porch.
Right.
He finds fault with her work in the store.
Yeah.
And it leads to that moment where Janie says,
Yeah.
"You sure loves to tell me what to do, but I can't tell you nothing. I see." Right? She's like, you can tell me what to do, but I can't tell you anything.
Right, and it really shows that double standard.
Yeah, and Janie's starting to feel really trapped.
Right, she feels like she's marking time.
Like her life is passing her by.
Yeah, she's not really living.
And, Jody is clearly the one in power in Eatonville.
Right, everybody kind of bows down to him.
Yeah, because he's got the money and he's got the position.
Yeah, it's got the throne in the seat of his pants.
Yeah, exactly. And all of this kind of leads to this huge breaking point.
Yeah, the moment where Jody hits Janie for laughing at him.
Yeah, and she laughs because he's like getting older. He's like so sensitive about it.
Yeah.
And he hits her, and it's like this huge moment for Janie.
It's a turning point.
Yeah. It's like she realizes, like, I don't love this man anymore.
Right. Any illusions she had are gone.
Gone.
Yeah.
And after that, Jody moves downstairs, and they're basically living separate lives.
Right, and the town is full of gossip about what's going on. They're like, what's happening with them?
They're speculating about his health.
Right.
And Janie is like really going through it internally.
Yeah, she starts to reflect on their relationship.
Yeah.
And she says that her own mind had to be squeezed and crowded out to make room for yours and me.
Wow.
Which is just so sad.
Yeah.
It's like she had to give up her own self.
To make space for him.
Right.
And then she confronts him on his deathbed.
She does.
Which is such a powerful scene.
Yeah, she finally says everything she's been holding back.
Yeah, she's like, you never really knew me.
Right.
You were so focused on your own image.
Exactly.
And it's like this moment of release for her.
It's like she's finally free.
Yeah, and then right after he dies, she lets down her hair.
She lets down her hair, which had been tied up this whole time.
Yeah.
And it's like the symbol of her freedom.
Yeah.
It's like she's finally letting go of all those constraints. And,
Yeah.
They have this huge funeral for Jody, the finest thing Orange County had ever seen with Negro eyes.
Yeah, it's like this big spectacle.
Right.
But Janie's already moved on.
She's already thinking about the future.
Excellent.
And then she burns all of her head rags.
She burns all of her head rags.
Yeah, which is like the symbolic act of...
Like, I'm done with this.
Yeah, I'm done with this life. I'm embracing my natural self.
I'm embracing my new life.
Yeah.
And then tea cake arrives.
Tea cake.
And it's like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, it's a completely different dynamic than what she had with Jody or Logan.
Right. There's this immediate, like, connection.
Right.
They're playing checkers, and they're laughing, and he's like...
Right. He's got this playful energy.
Playful, and he gives her this cute nickname.
Yeah.
And he wants to comb her hair.
Yeah. Which is so significant.
Yeah, after Jody.
After Jody, who controlled her hair.
Yeah, it's like this act of care.
Yeah.
But, of course, the townspeople are not happy.
No, they're not. They see this age difference.
Yeah, they're like, what is she doing?
And they think he's after her money.
Yeah. They're like, he's a gold digger.
Right.
And then they go to this picnic.
It's a picnic.
And she's wearing pink linen.
Yeah.
And everybody's gossiping.
Oh, yeah. Sam Watson and Phoebe are like,
yeah,
what is she thinking?
What is going on? And Phoebe's like, girl, you need to be careful.
She's like, these younger men,
Yeah.
they're trouble.
But Janie's like, no.
She's like, you don't understand.
Wait, this is real.
Right. She says, it's the thought that makes the difference in ages.
Right. She's like, it's about connection.
Exactly.
It's about our souls connecting.
Yeah.
It's not about the number of years.
Right. And they decide to get married.
They get married.
And he even picks out a blue satin dress for her.
Which is so sweet.
It is so sweet.
It's like he's really thoughtful.
Yeah.
And then we meet Mrs. Turner.
Oh, Mrs. Turner.
Who is this character who, like, hates Black people.
Right. She has this internalized racism.
She has this internalized racism, and she's, like, trying to set Janie up with her brother.
Right.
Who's lighter skin.
Who has lighter skin.
And it's like this whole other layer of, like, the social dynamics.
It really shows, the colorism that existed within the Black community.
Yeah. And it's sad because it's like,
All right.
it's coming from within the community.
All right, it's the self-hatred.
Yeah. And then we have this really disturbing incident where Tea Cake beats Janie.
Yeah, that's a really hard part of the book to read.
Yeah, it's like, we see this loving relationship and then all of a sudden he's like violent and it's like, wait, what?
It's really jarring.
It's jarring. And, Mary Helen Washington brings this up in the foreword.
Yeah.
And she's like, we have to look at this critically.
Right.
Like, how is this violence portrayed?
Yeah.
And what does it say about, relationships and power?
Right. And it's something that, was very common at the time, unfortunately. And, the community's reaction is also kind of mixed.
Yeah, they're like gossiping.
They're gossiping. They're shocked.
Yeah.
But also there's like an acceptance.
Yeah, like this is just how it is.
Right.
But then we also see Tea Cake being really protective of Janie.
Yeah, during the fight at Mrs. Turner's cafe, he's like, don't you talk to her like that?
Yeah.
And he ends up getting into a fight.
Yeah.
And ironically, Mrs. Turner gets caught in the crossfire.
Yeah, she gets hurt.
Which is, not great, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it's a very complex situation.
Yeah.
And then they move to the Everglades.
The Everglades.
Which is a completely different world.
It's a completely different world.
It's this vast, wild landscape.
They call it Demuk.
Demuk.
Yeah.
And Janie is like really thrown into this new environment.
Right.
But she finds this community there.
Yeah, among the migrant workers.
Yeah. And she's working alongside them. She's gambling with them.
Right.
She's listening to their stories.
Yeah.
And she even starts telling her own stories.
Yeah, she starts finding her voice.
Yeah, and she's really connecting with the Bahamian workers.
Right, they have their own culture.
Yeah.
Their own rhythms.
And she's like appreciating that.
Yeah.
But then there's this hurricane coming in.
Right.
People are like...
They're starting to warn everybody.
Yeah, they're like, this is a big one.
Yeah.
You need to get out of here.
Right.
And some people leave.
Some people leave.
And some people stay.
Some people stay.
And the ones who stay are like huddled together as the storm is raging.
Yeah.
And there's this moment where Tea Cake says to Janie,
yeah,
I reckon you wish now you had stayed in your big house way from such as this, don't you?
Right. He's basically saying, like, do you regret this?
Yeah.
Do you regret choosing this life with me?
Right.
And it really shows that Janie chose this.
Yeah.
She wasn't forced into it.
Right.
She went with him willingly.
Yeah.
Knowing the risks.
And then they're trying to escape the floodwaters.
Right. They're trying to survive.
It's like this desperate struggle against nature. And in this moment of chaos,
right,
Tea Cake gets bitten by a rabid dog.
Yeah.
While he's saving Janie.
So he's saving Janie.
So it's like this heroic act.
Yeah.
But it leads to this horrible consequence.
Right. It's a tragic twist of fate.
Yeah.
And they go on this really difficult journey
to
try to find medical help.
Yeah. They're like desperately trying to save him.
Right.
But the rabies taking over.
Yeah. And it changes him.
Yeah. He becomes paranoid. He's jealous.
Right.
He's not himself anymore.
Right.
And Janie's terrified.
Yeah.
She's like, I don't know what to do.
Right.
And she's really careful with his gun.
Yeah, because she knows he's not in his right mind.
Yeah.
And she's afraid of what he might do.
Right.
And it leads to this heartbreaking confrontation where Janie has to shoot him.
She has to shoot him to protect herself.
Right.
It's like this impossible situation where she's forced to kill the man she loves.
Right.
To survive.
Yeah.
And then she goes on trial. And it's a white judge and a white jury.
Right. And the racial dynamics are so clear.
Yeah, you can feel the tension.
Yeah.
And Sop to Bottom tries to speak up for Janie.
He does.
But he's immediately silenced.
Right. By Mr. Prescott.
By Mr. Prescott.
Who is a white lawyer.
Yeah. And it's like...
It shows, how little power black voices had.
Yeah, they're not even allowed to speak.
Right.
But Janie gets to testify.
She does.
And she tells her story.
Great.
And she talks about her love for Tea Cake.
Yeah.
And she's like, I didn't want to kill him.
Right.
I had to.
It was self-defense.
Yeah.
And it's really powerful.
Yeah.
Because she's finally getting to tell her side of the story.
Right. But the community on the muck is against her.
Yeah. They've already decided that she's guilty based on rumors and gossip.
Right.
And it's really sad because she's lost Tea Cake.
Yeah.
And now she's losing her community.
Yeah.
But she's acquitted.
She's acquitted.
Yeah.
And she goes back to Eatonville.
She goes back to Eatonville.
And she tells Phoebe everything.
Yeah.
And it's like this full circle moment.
Right. She's come full circle.
Yeah.
But she's not the same woman who left.
Right. She's been through so much.
Yeah. She says she's been to D Horizon and back.
Yeah.
And she's living by comparisons now.
Yeah. She has this like wisdom.
Right.
And she has this beautiful metaphor about love being like the sea.
Oh.
Taking its shape from the shore it meets.
Which I think is so perfect because it shows that love can take many forms.
Right. And it changes depending on who you're with.
Right.
And Mary Helen Washington, brings up some interesting questions about how Janie is portrayed.
Right.
She's like, is she really autonomous?
Right.
Or is she still being controlled by the men in her life?
Yeah. And she also brings up the violence.
Yeah.
The violence against Janie and how that's portrayed.
And she's like, we have to think about this critically.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important point. Because it's like, even though this book is celebrated as this, feminist novel, there are still these elements that are problematic. We have to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And Washington also talks about how, each generation brings new understanding to the novel. And that's so true.
Yeah.
It's like we're reading it now.
Yeah.
And we're seeing things that maybe readers in the past didn't see.
Right. And she points out that the novel explores all these themes. Yeah. Individual desires versus community censure.
Right.
Loveless marriages.
Yeah.
Abuse.
Yeah.
Forbidden love. Yeah. Multicultural characters.
Yeah.
It's so rich.
It's so rich.
Yeah.
And then Janie has this final realization that, everyone has to go to God and they got to find out about living for themselves.
Yeah.
Which is like this powerful statement of like,
individual agency.
Individual agency. Like you have to figure out your own life.
Right.
Nobody else can do it for you.
Exactly.
So, I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But just to kind of wrap it up.
Okay.
Janie's journey is this profound exploration of self-discovery.
Right.
It's set in this, vibrant but also restrictive community.
Yeah.
And it really explores love and relationships in all their different forms.
Right.
And it's still relevant today.
Absolutely.
Because it's talking about identity and voice and societal expectations.
Right.
So for me, some of the things that really stood out were like that moment when Janie realizes she's black.
Right.
In the photograph.
It's such a simple moment.
Yeah, but it's like so pivotal.
Right.
And then, her understanding of nanny sacrifices, like why Nanny did what she did.
Right.
And then her relationships with Logan Jody and Tea Cake.
Right.
Like how different they were.